We're doing it live, folks. Join the conversation right now about Ryan Merkley asking for a trade. All that and more coming up right now here on Teal Town Live. Well, that went swimmingly. Good evening, everyone. January 3rd, 2022. And breaking news happened earlier this morning. We'll get into the future of Ryan Merkley and the San Jose Sharks right now here on Teal Town Live. And we welcome all of you in Sharks territory and around the world in this conversation. So chat with us and fellow Sharks fans on the page on YouTube or on the YouTube app. Of course, follow us on the social, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, SoundCloud, all the social media along with tealtownusa.com. And, of course, you can support the podcast by hitting us up with a Super Chat donation on YouTube or on Venmo at tealtownusa. And with that, good evening to you, Mr. Ian Reid. How are you, sir?
I'm all right. It's, when the Sharks do bad, it's bad. No, I don't know. It's fine.
We're already going there, huh? Oh, boy. It's interesting one. I try to remember throughout the Sharks' history about anybody demanding a trade out of San Jose. And for Ryan Merkley, I mean, this is a kid that I think we were talking about just before we went on the air. The dream scenario was to have three defensemen on the right side.
Yeah.
That are offensive minded. A few years ago, they have with Burns, Carlson, and Merkley, and I think also, if one of them were to be moved, you have Merkley to jump in here. So, Ian, I'll begin with this. The potential's been there, but what happened?
I think, honestly, it's a regime change. I think the regime change has been, the biggest change. I think that obviously when you have a new GM come in and kind of shake up the front office the way Mike Grier has, I think priorities have changed a little bit. I agree. I think when Ryan Merkley was drafted, right shot D-men are heavily coveted, especially some with offensive chops. But with the new regime, obviously they're going to value different players differently. They obviously had an approach that came into this season where, if guys were going to get called up, they didn't seem to want to call up any of the guys that you would rhyme off when you're like, oh, who's going to be the guy you call up, right? And it's never been any of those guys where I think if you asked us before the season, who are the Sharks calling up? It's never been that. We haven't had that this season, right? Nobody, if you said that your first call-ups were CJ Ceason and Nick Cicek, you're a liar.
Yeah, especially since how many kids got experience last season, with the likes of Merkley and Scott Reedy, Jasper Weatherby. You had all those guys, get their feet wet in the NHL, especially, and this kind of comes off of everything that happened last October 30th when you had the 7 players plus then Coach Bob Booner going to COVID protocol. That's when Merkley made his debut, and you kind of got to see what they did. And in that 3-2-1 stretch where a lot of these kids got a chance, they didn't look too bad.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of guys last year were probably thrown into positions where I think they had to play a little over their heads. And obviously the lack of depth last year made it so that maybe some kids maybe got called up and got put in positions maybe before they were ready to play. So the Sharks did want to address that this season by bringing in some guys to kind of fill in those bottom spots. And I think if you're looking at a guy like Jasper Weatherby, for example, I think is a great example of a player you brought up who just, you could call him up, but I mean, the Sharks already have so many of that guy like they have so many bottom six forwards on the roster right now. Like there's really no place for a guy like Weatherby to get called up, right? So obviously you're thinking based on, you know, some of the things that have happened, you'd be like, oh well, maybe Bordelot will get a call, maybe Eklund, maybe, you know, or obviously when Brent Burns got, I think a lot of us were like, oh well, it's Ryan Merkley's time now. He's probably going to be the guy. And this offseason, and you know, going into this season, it was pretty much made abundantly clear really quickly after the guys that the Sharks brought in, that wasn't going to happen, or at least it wasn't going to be an easy road to get up to the NHL for the top guys.
Yeah, I think they wanted them to be extra marinated, ripe and ready for them to be up next season. I think is what I think a lot of us are expecting these kids to come up for. And I think there's a little bit of push to see what's gone on, and especially since they got that cup of coffee and looking at his stats, you know, since he was drafted, you know, in the first round, 20th overall by the Sharks in 2018. I mean, he put up still some phenomenal numbers, you know, his draft year, or his first year after being drafted, I should say. You know, I mean, that's over 71 points between Guelph and Peterborough, and then he gets that little stint in the AHL after his OHL season's over, and then of course the OHL season the following year gets postponed due to COVID, and puts up phenomenal numbers with the London Knights, and then he gets to the CUDA, and you know, I don't want to say that his numbers were affected that much, but I mean, it just doesn't seem to be there just yet.
Yeah, I mean, those numbers obviously don't jump off the page. And I think, look, I'm going to try and be as even on Ryan Merkley, because Ryan Merkley is a player. Like, I'm gonna say this just flat out, just to get this out. Like, Ryan Merkley is a player that I do like. And I think that there's an AHL player there somewhere. But I'm not going to sit here and say that, you know, everything Ryan Merkley's done has been super phenomenal, and, you know, and that, you know, he's just been languishing in the AHL for no reason, right? Like there's two sides to that story. I think, a lot of the things you're going to hear about Ryan Merkley right now, obviously, are about like attitude issues and stuff like that, right? Because that was, I think, when you get a reputation of having attitude problems in junior, like the way he did, where obviously where there's that much smoke, there's got to be fire. That kind of, unfortunately for a lot of players, that hangs with them for a long time. And it's hard to shake that once you have that reputation, it's really hard to shake it. But the one thing I will say, though, is that, like, really, as far as, like, I know a lot of people are kind of citing attitude issues, but that's not been something that we've really heard much of. Like, I don't recall hearing anything out of London. And if you're going to hear stories like London, they would get out. If he was having attitude issues in London, like, those stories get out. You know, Nick Nolenberger was just on Locked On and said that, you know, Ryan Merkley's attitude has been really good and for what he's seen, right? So I think that I'd like to see people kind of just put that part of it away. Because I don't think and again, I'm not around the team, so I can't speak to Ryan Merkley's attitude. I can only speak to the way I've watched him play this season. But I don't think... So I don't, you know, could there be attitude issues? Maybe once he's gone, we're going to hear, you know, a whole bunch of stories. But I still feel like someone's going to be saying something if there's rumors of attitude issues, because it's not like the Barracuda, like, we've never heard issues of guys having, you know, attitude problems before. Like, when the Barracuda first moved here, you know, like, it wasn't like front page news, but there was a lot of rumbling that you could get from back channels about how the team was unhappy with Nikolai Goldobin and Nikita Yevpalovs, for example. Those two guys kind of getting under people's skin in the organization, right? I know that's going way back, but just to use that as an example, like, I feel like if there was attitude issues with Ryan Merkley, I feel like we would have heard something by this point. He's been around for 3 years now, right?
Right.
So I think I know a lot of people are going there. I don't think that's fair. I think that's just kind of hockey attitude where once you have that reputation, it's really, really hard to shake, unfortunately. And I think that I don't know. Like I said, if something comes out later, then I'll come on here and, I'll eat my words. But I don't think that's the issue here.
No, I think it more so it's on ice play. I think we've seen many times where he's kind of like skipped around the defender at the point, and then he's skating, still stick handling, and not making that pinpoint precise moment to either shoot or pass it to someone. He's always waiting for almost overthinking, looking for the perfect pass.
Sometimes, yeah. I think, and that's unfortunate because I think one thing that Ryan Merkley has in spades is vision. I just think sometimes his decision making can be a little slow. But again, for the most part, I've been pretty positive on Ryan Merkley's play this year. Now look at the game. We'll get to the game where he got benched. Obviously, recently, where kind of all this. I don't think this is the genesis of that, but I think it was an interesting thing to happen, right? Because the game where he got benched, he absolutely deserved it because he was not good that game, and I'll be the first to admit that. And so I thought it was interesting that he got benched for as long as he did, though. With obviously Mike Grier was in the building for that game, and I thought that was an interesting message sent by. If you're a coach and you want to send a message about a player, that's a hell of a way to do it. Now, maybe, and again, that's just my interpretation. There might be absolutely nothing to that, but I thought that was an interesting message sent by John McCarthy to Mike Grier, and maybe it wasn't, but it's hard to not to kind of connect dots there.
Yeah, and you hear the lack of urgency in his game.
Yeah, there can be. I'm not going to tell you that all his games have been thing, but I think the one thing that kind of does rub me the wrong way about some of the narrative on Ryan Merkley is the fact he just can't defend. I think I think there's been effort on the defensive end of the puck, maybe not as much as people would like to see, but I think it's been there. I think it's something that he has worked on. I think it's something he's worked on for sure. And I think that, look at, again, you don't draft guys like Ryan Merkley for their shutdown. You didn't draft Ryan Merkley to shut guys down on the way into the blue line, right? You drafted him because he has a specific skill set to bring pucks the other way. Now, obviously, you have to be somewhat decent at defending in the NHL if you're not going to put up a ton of points. Now, look, and again, the stats for Ryan Merkley don't jump off the page at you as, oh my God, this is the next Erik Karlsson or whatever, right? But I use Erik Karlsson a lot as an example because I think they're both equally polarizing players, and some of the reasons that they're polarizing are dumb. It's just you didn't trade for Erik Karlsson, for example, to Scott Stevens guys on the blue line and shut guys down in front of the net. That's not what you brought Erik Karlsson in, right? No. And that's the same thing with Ryan Merkley, right? Ryan Merkley wasn't drafted because he was this great shutdown defenseman. That's never going to be his game. Now, can he show a little more hustle at times, in his own zone? Yeah. Obviously I think there's some times where, especially the game he got benched recently against, I want to say it was Coachella. Or was it Coachella?
I believe it was Coachella on the 27th of December.
Yeah, I think it was Coachella, and he and again he deserved it. And I posted the GIF for that goal, and I think my caption was, Ryan Merkley gets absolutely walked.
Excuse me, it was Bakersfield.
Oh, it was Baker. You're right. It was Baker. Yeah, it was Bakersfield. But you know what I mean? It was that was my caption. Ryan Merkley gets absolutely walked, and they scored. I don't know.
It's tough because there have been sparks in his game, but what's the proverbial the controller had all its batteries die on that period, and that's and that's a telltale sign, and that's interesting to see what they would do, and just kind of looking at some of the comments in the chat so far. We want to get you guys girls and
Yeah,
everyone involved here.
absolutely.
You know, Burge 7F91 saying, I think
Mhm.
it's more of an indictment on the Sharks development system because of Eklund, Bordelot, Weisblatt, and now Merkley aren't dominating in the AHL. Am I wrong? I mean, Bordelot's been lighting it up. He's got 15 goals this season so far. Eklund's been a pretty good assist machine as well.
Yeah. Let me let me so let's start there. Like Eklund, Bordelot, Robbins, like these guys. Yeah, like everyone has to remember these are first year pros. They're all first year pros, and they've done the bulk of the like Eklund and Bordelot especially have done the heavy lifting on offense for the Barracuda. I don't really. I think like Eklund and Bordelot are fine. Like, are they dominating? No, but like they're first year pros. Like I didn't expect them to dominate, and it's hard to dominate too when like the Barracuda overall. Like I think there was a lot of excitement because of the players coming in, obviously, and they had nowhere to go but up after last year. But I think some people like I think we you might have overrated them a little because I think the one thing that we have to accept as Sharks fans is the Sharks were in the conference finals in 2019, and 2019 wasn't that long ago, right? Like
Yep.
the Sharks haven't been bad. Like the Sharks up until, recently were in win now mode. That's why guys like Josh Norris aren't here. Prospects that could have come into the system and helped this Barracuda team be better now, obviously were sent out the door because the Sharks were trying to win now.
Mm-hmm.
And I know because of the pandemic, it feels like this last year has been 10. But I think we have to realize that like the Sharks haven't been bad for that long, especially not as long as some of these other teams in the Pacific, like like the Ontario Reign have had far more time to gear up, like load up on prospects because LA's been crap forever. Don't ask me what's going on with the Gulls because the Ducks have had a lot of time to build their prospect pool as well. But you know what I mean? Like some of these teams have had a lot more time to really build up, whereas the Sharks kind of have like this group of rookies, and then they brought some vets in to try and insulate them and try to do more. And again, other than Egazino, I don't think the Barracuda have gotten as much as they needed out of their vets. Guys like Verano was brought in to try and spark some offense. I know he's had injury issues. I'm trying to remember the other gentleman's name that they brought in too. Like they brought in some
Johnson?
guys that haven't. Yes, thank you. They've brought in some guys that haven't. I don't think haven't done as well as they want. And this blue line was going into the season. When we talked to Nick at the start of the season, we said, what's the concern? And he said the blue line, which I 100% agree with. The blue line has obviously it's their weakest. It was their weakest link, and then you combine the issues that they've had on the blue line with injuries, and it's kind of a recipe for disaster. About it was kind of a disaster waiting to happen. And unfortunately, it has been kind of a disaster for the Barracudas. So, I guess getting back to the point though, I'm not worried about like Bordelot. I'm not worried about Eklund. A lot of people are like, oh, well, they haven't been called up. Are they going to ask for a trade too? No, they're first year pros. They're going to keep their head down and do what they're told. Ryan Merkley's been around for a little bit longer. Now, can you argue that maybe if you're, will him demanding a trade this early in his career rub people the wrong way? Absolutely. I can see that. But he's in a more like he's in a much better position to request that than a guy who's a first year pro. Like a first year pro, you just keep your head down, you shut up, and you're told, right?
Sure.
Same thing with Strauss-Mann getting constantly sent to Wichita. He's not going to say anything. He's just going to keep his head down, keep his mouth shut, and do what he's told because he's a first year pro.
Right. And I think he understands the situation at hand in the Barracuda, where you have Dell, you have Makiniemi.
Yep.
Unless there's a move with Reimer or Kakinen, I think Strassman knows exactly where he's going to be at.
It's a logjam. It's a logjam.
You can't carry three goalies in
Nope.
in the Cuda system. Well, I think getting back to what you said with Eklund and Bordelot, a couple of things here. My wondering is, and you say, they don't have the leverage because they're first year pros.
Yeah.
Do you get
you shut up and you do your job.
do you get concerned that that having Merkley being where he's at kind of I don't want to say plant your seed into that. Hey, I'm getting frustrated being down here again when I know that the major league club could actually use my services here. And in the sense, and I'll use Bordelot as an example.
Mm-hmm.
15 goals. He's doing a phenomenal job with the Barracuda, and then you see that the Sharks need scoring. Coming out
And they call up CJCs.
Yeah, I mean that's
Yeah.
I mean to use the quote Peter Griffin, that's got to grind their gears just a little bit there.
Oh, I think it should. Yeah. And look I think I have been on the record saying I like it. Put a chip on their shoulder. They're first year, they're rookie players, and I think they're fine. Bordelot's a guy I would call up. I think Eklund does have a year of slide still, so I can see the Sharks wanting to kind of just kick that can down the road a little bit. But Bordelot's a guy I think that they probably could have called up at a couple of points this season to fill in for guys. But again, it's there just because I think so. I mean, doesn't make it so.
True. My other question I have for you is that we've seen the Sharks do this before, where they've kind of gave the kids like a sprinkling in the NHL. We saw it about 5-6 years ago when Timo Meier got called up, and how everybody was like, asking for, okay, when's Timo coming up? They need some goal scoring. And then, of course, Timo does his thing right away, getting his first 2 goals in Montreal, and now look where he's done now. Same thing with Kevin Labanc, getting that little taste, and then, the following year they get into that. And, of course, the Kuhre, having those kids go on to have one of their best seasons ever. Were the expectations too high for the Kuhre? And for that matter, are you going to hold judgment or hold back your expectations for these kids, considering what we've seen with Timo Meier and Kevin Labanc? But we've also seen how high we're having expectations for Shimilevsky and Chekovich to make this team in 1920.
So here's the difference between Timo Meier and name any other Sharks prospect. Timo Meier was a 9th overall pick. Now, William Eklund's a 7th overall pick. So there is that. But Timo Meier was a 9th overall pick in an incredibly deep draft.
Right.
So like Timo Meier was a player who, had to go up and down a little bit to start his career, like most guys do. But Timo Meier, other than his shot selection, he was just there. He had his size. He had the size for it. He wasn't undersized. So I think Timo Meier's in a different category than those. Now you could make an argument like Eklund's a 7th overall pick. So what's the issue there?
Right.
But Timo Meier also, he's Swiss, but he played junior hockey. Whereas not only is William Eklund coming over, but he's getting used to a smaller ice surface. And I think he's done really good. I think as the season's progressed, William Eklund's been fantastic for the Barracuda. And I think William Eklund's going to be a hell of a player. But I don't think it's an apples to apples comparison with Timo Meier. And then if you look at a guy like Kevin Labanc had to go up and down a lot too.
Right.
But again, more... Thomas Bordelot, again, 2nd round pick. Tristan Robbins, 2nd round pick. So it's not an apples to apples comparison, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. I think there were, I'll admit, I was guilty of it, because you thinking, okay, Bordelot, Merkley, Eklund, Robbins, Gushchin, it looks like a recipe to repeat 2017 all over again for the Kuhre, just to see how these kids.
Yeah, but where's the blue line?
And that's the point, is that they need some
that
help
blue line.
all around.
When you look back at some of those guys they had on that blue line, right? You had some decent guys. You had a Jake Middleton on that blue line. You had some decent pieces on that blue line that were maybe not ever going to be NHL bound, but they were good AHL pieces. Where the half this year, the Barracuda have played with guys on PTOs, making up half their blue line. Right?
Yeah, it's a tough one to take, and get with the Sharks having some injury issues, and again, Radim Shimmick is likely out again.
Mhm.
You're going to have Harrington and then Cechek kind of fill in that time. It's going to be tough.
Yeah, and I think that's something too. Like obviously Denver Doyle in the chat saying I knew there was an issue when Merkley couldn't crack the NHL roster with guys like Harrington and Benning making it, but like that's why those guys were brought in. Those guys were
Yeah.
brought in to do that. And like I like Nick Cechek, and I don't want to like turn this into like a beat up on Nick Cechek guy, but if you think Nick Cechek's our best defensive prospect, then God, this prospect pool is trouble.
And that's what I was going to get next, is that with what's going on here, there's not a whole lot on the defense.
Mm-hmm.
What was it, 2020? I'm sorry,
Yeah, like
2019, that they went all forwards in the draft.
Mhm. Yeah, this look at they have obviously Hataka's injured. I don't think much of Knyzev as far as like guys that are currently there. Gannon Larocque I think is just gonna be suiting up for the Victoria Royals.
Yep.
Like he's missed all season. Havlet over in Sweden, the guy they drafted this thing hasn't really played this season as far as I know. Again because of injuries. So like this the blue line, there's no reinforcements coming on this blue line, so they're gonna have to figure that out. I don't think obviously losing Derek Pouliot for as long as they have hurts them, because I think he as I don't think much of him as like a potential guy who's going to come up in the NHL and play minutes, but I think for what they brought him in for, he's the perfect guy for that role. So yeah, I think like that blue line is rough, and there's not really any help coming.
Yeah, and it's going to be tough to when you make that move, if you make that move. Doug Anderson in the chat, with Merkley's trade request being so public, do you think that this could expedite the Sharks moving out an NHLer, someone to potentially package Merkley with?
Yeah. So here. I don't think like Ryan Merkley on his own, I don't think is going to fetch you anything, and I think that's the really hard thing with Ryan Merkley requesting a trade at this point. I don't think his stock could be much like lower as far as what his stock is. If my opinion is Ryan Merkley is going to be, again, I've tweeted this out a few times today, so forgive me for just kind of repeating what I tweet, but Ryan Merkley to me is going to be a guy who is thrown in with like a James Reimer to try and increase the value of whatever return that is. I think if you're expecting Ryan Merkley to go out and another first round draft pick to come in, or a player who is formerly drafted in the first round to come in, I don't think like as a 1-for-1, I don't think that's going to happen. Mm. I think it's going to be a situation where he's going to get thrown into another deal to try and increase the return there. And maybe there's a quote unquote problem for a problem trade to be had. But my opinion, just based on where the salary cap is and what else is going on, I think he's going to be an add-in on a player that's going out. So I think Ryan Merkley gets traded anytime soon? No, I think he's probably going to have to just, suck it up and play till the trade deadline and try and do his best and and make the best of whatever time he has left in San Jose, and then hopefully at the trade deadline something can be had, and maybe he gets what he wants. And look at, again, I like the player. Do I think this is a perfect player? No, but I like the player. I hope he does. I hope he gets a change of scenery and does well.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you, if he were to be separated in a separate trade, I mean, what are the Sharks looking at gaining potentially in return?
I have no idea.
Is it? I mean, I would think it's just going to be. Is it going to be a complete fleecing? I mean, obviously.
It's one of those things because, like, again, I don't think his stock is going to be incredibly high right now. Someone will roll the dice. Look at, he's a right shot offensive defenseman. Someone will roll the dice on Ryan Merkley. But I don't know. It's so hard to gauge return. It's going to be, at best, if it was 1-for-1, it's going to be an AHL guy for an AHL guy.
Yeah.
Like I wish I could give you a better guesstimation, but my opinion, like I said, I don't think that's the play. I think the play is he's going to get included into another deal to try to maybe increase the value. Because again, like I have long been of the goalies don't get anything at the trade deadline, but if you throw a right-handed shot, if you throw in a right shot offensive defenseman that some team thinks they can fix, maybe that, maybe whatever James Reimer would fetch, a third or whatever it is, maybe a second, but maybe that becomes a second, maybe that becomes a first.
It becomes the
We'll
sweetener to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that makes much more sense than I think just having a separate trade out big time. The other thing, and you know what, Jim?
So I want to hit the chat here.
Yeah.
Merkley is waiver exempt, and that also a lot of teams will also like that. So again, like I think I can't say this enough. Like, I like the player. I think there's an NHL player there. Is Ryan Merkley? Am I thinking Ryan Merkley's going to be an absolute superstar at this point? No, but I think there's an NHL player there. I think there's a guy there that you could, at worst, quarterback your second power play.
Indeed. The one I wanted to get to in the chat, Jim and FLA, Merkley is an RFA at the end of the year, so that trade might happen quicker than you think.
Yeah, I mean, again, you look at he's a controlled asset. I don't think. Let me just look here. I usually have all these screens up and ready, but I want to look at. Or I don't want to support.
Because I want to say, as you look for that, I mean, you have.
I just want to see if he has arbitration rights or not.
Gotcha. I know Jerk and AJ were talking about Pucknologist. If he were to re-sign with the team.
Yeah, he's an RFA. He has no arbitration rights. So I mean, he's a qualifying offer away, right? And something that was brought up to me on Twitter too was like, I wonder if Ryan Merkley is a guy where like a team signs him and maybe they qualify him and then send him to Europe, let him play a year in Europe. I think that might do Ryan Merkley a world of good. Give him a qualifying offer, retain his rights, send him to Europe for a year.
Yeah. So it remains to be seen what this is going on, but there is some fluidity going on. Of course, David Quinn has dealt with this in a similar sense in the NHL level, dealing with scratching, Capo Caco when he was with the Rangers a couple of years ago. Honestly, as we get ready to, I guess, kind of start wrapping this up, do you think the Sharks' development system let Merkley down? Or is it all on him?
No, I think there's plenty of blame to go around. I think there's probably some, again, I don't think Ryan Merkley is this perfect angelic human being. I'm sure there's some problems there, but again, like, I don't think that as far as development goes, like, I don't want to, it's too early to really give a call on John McCarthy as a coach, but I've never been overly positive about the guy that came before him.
And boy, how's that looking right now? It's just, you're on an 8-game losing streak. You have this go on. I'm going to be curious to see at the morning skate tomorrow if he's going to be in the lineup or even practicing.
I think so. I think so. Like, I don't. When they said he wasn't skating this morning, now obviously he was already scheduled to do some off ice workout, so there's nothing to that. So I want to make that clear. Basically it was at first Liz Child first tweeted out like, "Oh, Ryan Merkley's not skating." It's like, "Oh, this is broken." But it looks like he was scheduled for that. John McCarthy said that, obviously it seemed like everyone was taken a little off guard that Ryan Merkley had requested a trade. It wasn't something that McCarthy was aware of before he was asked about it. So I think that there's some things on the Barracuda right now that are really frustrating, right? Like, obviously there's a serious lack of discipline down there with how many penalties this team takes. And I think John McCarthy has to take some of the heat for that. But I don't know, as far as like development, I don't know. I think John McCarthy has put Ryan Merkley, for the most part, in a position to succeed. He's been a guy who's been, who's gotten plenty of power play time. He's been, he's been given opportunity to succeed. I don't think I don't look at McCarthy and say, oh, well, McCarthy really screwed Ryan Merkley. I don't believe that. I don't have anything to say that that's the case. I think he's been given every opportunity to succeed this year with the Barracuda, especially with all the injuries that they've had on their blue line. Of that game, I mean, that game that he got benched is the only game I remember Ryan Merkley getting benched this year for any period of time, significant as that time was, where he sat for 2 periods. I don't recall that happening at any other point in the season. So yeah, I think Ryan Merkley's been given every chance to succeed under John McCarthy, and I don't lay this at John McCarthy's feet. Do I lay this a little bit at the previous administration's feet? Absolutely.
I completely easy for me to say. I completely agree with you on that. This is kind of on the development beforehand, and like we said before, it takes a little bit to marinate.
Yeah.
But if you're expected to be this top-notch prospect, you were hoping to make a dent by now. And granted, like we said, he spent almost half a season with the Sharks.
Yeah, he spent 39 games with the Sharks last year.
And I didn't think he was. I didn't think it was awful.
No, I mean that team was awful. But I don't think, again, I think I don't think it was completely terrible. I know some people look at Ryan Merkley's an incredibly polarizing player. So I can understand there's even people here that are gonna tear me a new asshole in the comments, being like, "What do you mean he wasn't? He was the worst fucking player we've ever brought up, and that was that." And it's like, yeah, we had fucking Nick Melange on the team last year.
Yikes.
So I don't think I've tried to give Ryan Merkley as clean, coming into the Barracuda this year. Obviously I didn't really watch the Barracuda last year, so one of my goals this year was, obviously I know what a lot of things were said about a lot of players last year, but I didn't want to come in this season I took all that into consideration, and then I kind of wanted to make my own conclusions. And again, my conclusion being again that if you look at a guy I think he's shown improvement this year. I think that there's definitely part of his game that he obviously could improve on, but I don't think he's been this absolute waste of a pick that a lot of people are going to make him out to be. I don't think so. Again, if you don't have all those junior attitude issues, Ryan Merkley doesn't fall to 20, and I will stick to that every day ever, because I think if you looked at talent, the talent's there. The talent is absolutely there with Ryan Merkley. It's just, is he ever going to be able to put it all together? I don't know. Stay tuned.
Stay tuned for that, and stay tuned for what happens next in this soap opera drama, I guess you could say. If you didn't catch us on the live feed, leave your comment down below. Where do you think Ryan Merkley's going to go next? I mean, obviously they got to look for a piece, but he's also got to play for this team. And if he doesn't, boy, how does that blow things up a lot more?
Oh, I mean, here's the other thing too. The Barracuda they're going to be in tough. If the Barracuda trade, if the Sharks trade Ryan Merkley and don't bring in anything to replace him, that Barracuda blue line is going to be a nightmare. I think they're going to have a hard time. They already have a hard time transitioning, but I think without Ryan Merkley, that gets ridiculously harder for the Barracuda to run their transition game. And you know what? I'm kind of waiting for it, because I think again, I understand Ryan Merkley is a polarizing player, but I don't think he's been as bad as some people think they are. And I think once he's not on that blue line, and I think people are going to be in for, I think some people are going to be in for a rude awakening once he's off that Barracuda blue line, just how much trouble that Barracuda blue line, just how trouble that transition game is going to be, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting final half a season for not just the Sharks, but for the Barracuda. And that's why we're here. We break this down and try to give you as much information as possible on this team. So in case you missed this, we want to check it out again. Check it out on tealtownusa.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Of course, if you're on YouTube right now, hit that like, subscribe, and notification bell. That lets you know when we go live. whenever news breaks, whenever something like this, where the discussion needs to happen with in regards to a rare trade demand. And of
Yeah.
course, be on the lookout for us after dark, following each and every hockey game, home and away for the Sharks, and of course, the Pucknologists every Sunday night at 7. So, Ian, you're at Ian Blogs Hockey. Your final thoughts, my friend.
I want to hit just one more comment in the chat. And thank you guys for all the chat. And I wish we would have been able to go in there a little bit more, but we didn't want this to be a 2-hour show, because when we do shows about like a single topic like this and we go too long, people generally beat us up for it. Alex Beltran's asking Merkley's strategy is demanding a trade for the Sharks to showcase them. No, man, scouts exist. Like, scouts are a thing. They can watch them in the AHL. I don't think that this is some super chess move by Ryan Merkley to get put on the NHL squad. I don't think that's the case at all. But anyway, thanks for the comments again. Thanks for all the other comments in the chat. Like I said, I wish we could have done more, but I didn't want to be on here for too long on a single topic. But yeah, if you want to discuss anything Barracuda with me, hit me up on the Twitter machine at Ian Blogs Hockey. I am happy to talk. Other than that, leave a comment in the chat. Tell me how dumb I am. It's cool.
You're gaslighting some people now, but kudos to Ian over here. He does the gifting for most of our Barracuda games, so be on the lookout for that at Teal Town USA on the Twitter machine. So for that, I'm at Puck14 on the Twitter and the Instagram. My final thought here is find a way to make things get a good return if that's the case. Or see if things, I'm not going to get all Jake DeBrusque on you, but, see if these can make things happy on both ends for the Sharks organization and for Ryan Merkley. So until then, we'll be back with you Friday following Sharks and Ducks. That's an ESPN Plus game. So
oh, God. Oh, God. Why?
And with that, keep it real, keep it teal, keep it real, Teal. Have a great night, everyone. We'll see you Friday night.